Sometimes the past doesn't come back, it simply takes a seat in the audience and watches you from the front row. This story isn't about a sudden mistake, it's about a decision that feels small in the moment, and stretches across an entire decade. She was performing the First Symphony by Dmitri Shostakovich as a guest violinist with the Memphis Symphony Orchestra at the Cannon Center for the Performing Arts in the middle of the concert when she noticed a familiar face sitting in the front rows of the auditorium. He looked a little older, with a few wrinkles on his forehead, than the last time she had seen him 10 years ago, but that face was unmistakably recognizable. When you see that face up close, kissing its lips, see that face up close when it smiles at you, see that face up close when it sleeps almost nose to nose with you in bed, you never forget that face. Never. She watched as that face spread into a slight smile when he realized that she had recognized him. She smiled back, and then returned to her work. She needed to focus on the present, although at that moment it was incredibly difficult for her not to think about her past. The last time she had seen that face was when she closed the garage door behind her, then walked to her car, got into it, and drove away toward her fate. Before her departure, he told her that he would not be home when she returned, but she did not believe it. She simply knew that it would not be so. He loved her too much to ever leave. It would hurt him, perhaps even hurt him incredibly, but his love for her had to prevail. Of course, he would be home, except he was not. Returning to the concert, some part of her wanted to jump up from her chair and run to him, make him speak to her, hug him. But at that moment she was somewhat busy, performing a beautiful musical piece as the first violin in that concert. Her career had gone upward since the last time she had seen that face, but her personal life, not so much. She could not count on him staying after the concert. For 10 years, 8 of which they were husband and wife, he had been the support in her life. The next 10 years he was a man invisible, although he remained her husband, at least officially. She played 3 more pieces with the Memphis Symphony Orchestra, from time to time glancing into the hall, before her performance ended. She left to thunderous applause, and under ordinary circumstances she would have called that evening another success in the upward spiral of her career. Under ordinary circumstances, she would have stayed until the end of the concert, congratulated the conductor, and chatted a little with several of the leading violinists of the orchestra before heading to her hotel room. However, on that evening she nervously paced back and forth behind the scenes, waiting for the end of the last 2 numbers before she could calmly go out into the hall and see whether her husband would still be there. And if not, would another 10 years pass before she saw that face again? She smiled and chatted a little with the orchestra members before leaving the hall to look for the familiar face, and felt her heart jump in her chest when she saw that he was still sitting in his seat and beaming at her when she looked at him. He was holding hands with a fair-haired fairy who looked no more than 18 years old. Noticing her, her husband and the young woman stood up and headed toward the stage. "You look good, Rosalind," the man said almost formally. Addressing the woman by her full name, the woman noticed the rigid tone of his voice, but not the fact that he had called her by her full name. As far as she understood at that moment, he could have called her Bozo the Clown, and she would have been just as stunned as she was now. Thank you, Nick," she said in a tight, quiet voice. "You look quite good yourself." He nodded and turned to look at the woman standing next to him and holding his hand. "Rosalind. This is my partner, Mara. She thinks you are wonderful." Rosalind visibly flinched when she heard how her husband had wanted to call the woman standing next to him his wife. She was his wife. Still, there had been no divorce. Neither of them had ever filed. How dare he consider this other woman, this child, his wife? Rosalind's face turned beet red with anger. Veins stood out on her neck. She took a couple of deep breaths to calm herself. Both the man and the woman noticed it. "Thank you. That is very kind of you. However, I am not sure that my husband agrees with you," she said, emphasizing her right to this man. Now it was the other woman's turn to blush. She could not help but know that formally Nick was still married to the woman on the stage. Nick quickly shifted his gaze from the face of one woman to the face of the other. He realized that it was his turn to speak. "You are mistaken. Your husband agrees with her," he said. "You are still a wonderful violinist. As for everything else, well, I think the decision has not yet been made." The woman on the stage winced again. Her life over the past 10 years had become proof that her husband was right. "You obviously stayed here because you know that we need to talk." At last, the woman said, "Are you sure that you want your young lady to be present for this?" "If you are talking about me, then I am 35, the woman with Nick replied pointedly. "I have good genes on my mother's side. Besides, I already know most of the story." Rosalind raised her hands in a sign of capitulation. "Why do you not take your violin, and I will take us to a nice, quiet place a few blocks from here, where we will have drinks and dessert?" Nick suggested. "We could talk about anything. Whatever you want to talk about." Rosalind returned with her violin, and all three of them headed toward his new Lincoln Sport utility vehicle, parked in the lot. Both women waited by the doors while Nick opened them. He smirked to himself. Rosalind sat down in the back seat and lovingly placed the violin case on the seat. Franco Giraldi was spending a 6-month tour as a guest conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Roz Summers had already been working in this orchestra for 6 months as a kind of wunderkind, being one of the youngest musicians in the violin section at the age of 31. The 47-year-old veteran conductor instantly fell for the full-figured strawberry platinum blonde with large breasts and bright green eyes. Giraldi was a tall, self-confident man with a regal bearing, in whom all of his northern Italian origin could be felt. He was married, but his wife, with whom he had lived for more than 20 years, did not go with him to Boston. He was looking for a suitable life companion for the duration of his stay in Boston, and the fact that his victim had a wedding ring on her finger did not bother him in the least. At that time, Roz had already been married to Nick Summers for 8 years. They met when they were both in their second year at the University of Virginia. And a year later they were already dating. They married a year after graduating from the university, and another year later moved to Boston, where Roz became the youngest member of the violin section of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. At that time, it seemed that Roz's employment bar was much higher than Nick's. She was a star college graduate, and her service in the Boston Symphony Orchestra promised even greater success. Nick, on the other hand, was just one of hundreds of business school graduates and had not yet found his niche. Simply in order to manage to settle somehow, soon after graduating he took a job as an assistant manager at a hardware store. 8 years later, Nick was still working at the hardware store. Now as a manager. He liked using his business skills to work with the owners, as well as improving customer relations. The money was not bad, although both of them knew that in big business he could earn much more, and, to tell the truth, Roz was a little embarrassed when she talked about how her husband earned his living. Nevertheless, the couple was very much in love with each other and was seriously considering expanding their family in the coming months. Franco was an experienced seducer. He had already had several affairs in the past, and he knew that the seduction of a married woman begins not with her body, but with her mind. Getting acquainted with his potential bed partner began with him remaining alone with her to talk. To find any cracks in the marriage and to understand what he liked and what he did not like. A month later, Franco learned that Roz and Nick were planning to expand their family in the near future. He understood that this woman was not completely certain that she was ready for what she considered the measured life of a mother, and Franco made her think, at least internally, about the fact that she was going to have only 2 sexual partners in her entire life. The boy who took her virginity, and then her husband, Nick. Franco never said a single bad word to Roz about her husband, but he constantly questioned her husband's devotion to her and to their future. Franco possessed world-class sophistication. And from the expression on her face it was clear that she shared his convictions. The young woman soon became accustomed to Franco's constant touches on her hands and shoulders when they talked, and to the increasingly frequent kisses that at first began on the cheek but gradually moved to the lips. She also got used to Franco rubbing against her thighs and buttocks from time to time when he helped her get in and out of the car, as well as when they sat down at the table to eat together. There was even an occasion when he smiled to himself when the woman accidentally touched him, stumbling as she got up from her chair in a restaurant during their lunch. Nick's love and absolute trust in his wife did not weaken. Despite the fact that in recent months his wife seemed to have become somewhat disappointed in him. He assumed that she was experiencing increasing pressure as her star continued to rise higher and higher. He was also not sure that her relationship with the guest conductor could develop in any way. But he was already tired of listening to Franco pour his wisdom onto him every time through the mouth of his own wife whenever Roz disagreed with him. Franco remained the guest conductor for another month, and he understood that he should press Roz a little harder if he wanted to drag her into bed before his departure from Boston. He saw that she would like to have sex with him, but was still devoted to her husband. During their next lunch he suggested that she ask her husband for a hall pass for the weekend so that she could try Franco before his departure. And since her husband would know about it, it would not become infidelity. It would simply be sex with another person, not love, and Roz and her husband would return back and spend the rest of their lives together, creating a family. Roz and Nick had never discussed their previous sexual lives in detail. Each of them knew that the other had not been a virgin when they began their life together, but in the course of discussing their past they came to the decision that the past should remain in the past. Nevertheless, Roz had always believed that Nick had more experience than she did. Because it was usually he who suggested something new in the bedroom. In reality, Nick had only one more sexual partner than Roz, but, being a typical man, he spent much more time on adult websites than his wife did, and was not afraid to bring what he saw on the internet into the bedroom, to the great pleasure of both of them. Roz knew that her husband loved her without reservation, since Nick usually gave in to her in almost any argument or disagreement. She was the stronger of the two partners in the marriage and usually could manipulate any situation to her advantage. Then, of course, there was always sex when other kinds of manipulation did not work. Nick did not immediately grasp Roz's prepared comment when she woke him later on Wednesday evening. The previous hour had been filled with intense physical intimacy. Rose had devoted herself to her husband, fueling his desire and taking control of the moment until their passion reached a wild climax. Exhausted and drenched in sweat, she finally collapsed onto the bed. After that, they lay side by side, silently catching their breath, the air still thick with what had just happened. Nick was completely absorbed by his magnificent wife that evening, but he was aware that this had been the most passionate sex that he and Roz had enjoyed in recent months. Therefore, he was sure that now was not the time to discuss anything. Nick asked, having not the slightest idea what his wife had just said. But the fact that she had uttered something of more than one syllable already caused him concern. I really need you to listen to me, Nick. This is important, Roz said. Roz had been preparing her speech to Nick all day after her conversation with Franco. She knew that what she was about to ask of her husband could shake the boundaries of his love for her, but deep down she was convinced that she deserved what she was asking for. One weekend out of the remaining life they had together was, of course, not all that much for Nick. Roz spoke quietly but firmly, all the while stroking her husband's chest. She might have reconsidered her position if she had raised her eyes and seen the suffering expression on Nick's face. He watched her closely as she spoke, noting to himself that she was not looking him in the eyes, but despite this she seemed to believe what she was saying. He became curious as to where these words were coming from her or from Franco. You seem quite certain that this is what you want, so I am not going to try to convince you that you are wrong in your desire, Nick said. All I want to ask you is whether you are ready to face the consequences of your actions. Roz finally raised her eyes to her husband's face when she heard the sharp tone of his voice. This will not change who we are, Nick, or what we have. I will not love you any less. Do not let your ego stand in our way. She said, Of course it will change who we are and what we have, Nick replied quietly. I will no longer fully trust you. In fact, I have already lost trust in you just because you asked such a question, I suppose. Now I understand that you do not love me the way I love you. Loved you. And this is not about ego. It is about the fact that I believe my wife should not have sex with anyone except me. Remember our vows. I thought it was for life. Roz's face fell when Nick answered. By the time he finished speaking, she was already crying. You are reacting too sharply, Nick. We are stronger than you think. You are stronger than you think you are yourself. She began, but you are not as strong as I thought you were. He interrupted. It is wrong to give another man what, as you promised, belongs only to me. I did not know that our vows had an expiration date. With these words, Nick got out of bed, put on his underwear, walked into the living room, and turned on the sports channel. He sat there, staring dully at the large screen, not hearing a single word of what was being said. Roz was completely confused by the way her husband rejected her request. He had never before completely rejected anything she had asked of him. She cried for several more minutes before finally deciding that she was doing the right thing. She knew that Nick would eventually look at things the way she wanted. Nick's alarm clock on his phone rang at 6 in the morning. In fact, he had not slept, rather, he lay on the couch, tossing from side to side. He took a shower, got dressed, and left the house several hours before his wife saw the dawn. Roz was planning to have lunch with Franco before the orchestra's afternoon rehearsal. When she arrived, he was already sitting at the table. When she approached the table, he stood up to greet her with a gentle kiss on the lips. You look worried. Did last night go well? He asked the woman. I definitely did not expect such a reaction. He will be more stubborn on this issue than I assumed, Roz said haltingly. Franco smiled softly to calm the woman and to enjoy the moment. It was her job to deal with her husband. And his job was to deal with her, so, we are agreed on this weekend, he stated, asking no questions. Why yes, she practically whispered. He owes me. He will give this to me. But he may need some time to realize it. American men are so prudish when it comes to sex. The more experienced his partner is, the better it is for him. I will teach you something. Several things, my dear. One day he will thank me, he said, giving her a wolfish smile. Franco's manners inspired confidence in Roz. On Thursday evening Nick, as usual, came home earlier than his wife and prepared dinner. He had almost finished dealing with the breaded chicken breasts and mashed potatoes when Roz came in through the door. Perhaps for the first time in his life, Nick did not stop what he was doing and did not kiss his wife to greet her homecoming. Dinner passed in silence. The elephant in the room took up a lot of space. Nick thought that he had clearly stated his position, and Roz was satisfied with leaving him alone, assuming that her husband would agree with her point of view. Nick noticed a small suitcase standing on the kitchen floor by the garage door when he came into the house after work on Friday evening. It was the answer to the question he had been afraid to ask his wife the day before. I made pepperoni and sausage pizza for you, Roz said when her husband entered the house. It should be ready in about 45 minutes. I used the sourdough dough that you like so much. Nick tried to speak, but his dry throat prevented him from uttering anything more than a rough assent. He could not believe that his wife was going to make a cuckold out of him this weekend. A cuckold. Several times during the day at work, in the privacy of his office, he said this word out loud. A cuckold. Could his wife really be so ignorant? So cruel? So selfish? Apparently, yes. If you do not need anything else, I am going to meet Franco. I will be back on Sunday afternoon and will make dinner on Sunday evening. Remember, this is only for this weekend, and then I will come back to show you for the rest of our days how much I love you. I love you also for giving me this, Roz said. Nick looked at his wife as if he had never seen her before. He sadly shook his head. By the way, I do not want to give this to you. You are taking it yourself and assuming that I will be here when you return, Nick said. Roz realized that she was about to roll her eyes, but restrained herself. Despite the fact that everything inside her stomach turned over, she put a smile on her face and held out her hands to her husband, not moving closer until he nodded. Nick hugged her tightly, understanding that this could very well be the last time, but his wife took this tight embrace as a sign that he would miss her over the weekend, despite the fact that there was no farewell kiss. Nick did not move for several minutes after Roz freed herself from his arms, picked up her suitcase, and headed for the door, moving with a confidence that contradicted her true feelings. When Nick finally moved, it was only to pack his own suitcase. Before leaving, he went on the internet, paid off and canceled all of their joint credit cards. He transferred about 1/3 of their shared money to a new account opened only in his own name. He filed a claim to terminate the contract under which their house remained his wife's. He would allow Roz to file for divorce herself. Then he got into the car and headed south. Franco patiently waited for Rosalind in his small but cozy apartment. They embraced like lovers when he met her at the door. He led her inside, and 10 minutes later, already without clothes, she was lying in his bed. From his conversations with Rosalind over the past several months, Franco knew that she was relatively inexperienced sexually. He himself was experienced and intended to teach her many things over this weekend, but the first time everything had to be reduced to preparing the woman for the touch of a man who was not her husband, for the first time since she had married 8 years earlier. Speaking in military terms, he wanted to produce shock and awe. After several heated kisses, Franco felt how Roz responded to each of his touches. Her breathing became uneven, her body trembled, and her moans betrayed the growing tension. He did not hurry, enjoying how she completely lost control. When the wave of pleasure covered her again, Franco realized that there was no distance left between them. Roz pressed herself against him, not hiding her emotions. After a few moments, they both crossed the final threshold, dissolving in this forbidden moment. Roz muttered something incoherently as she came back to herself. For the first time since she had entered Franco's apartment, she was able to think about something. She thought that her first sex with a man who was not her husband since she had married had been wonderful, although it had been no better than with Nick. Franco gently kissed her. "We have a table reserved at La Sergio for 1 o'clock. Put on that sexy dress I told you to bring," Franco said to her. Roz had asked him to reserve a table at a restaurant in some remote place in order to reduce the likelihood that she and Franco would run into someone who knew her and her husband. Roz was impressed by Franco's stamina and by the fact that he had 2 more times when the couple returned from the restaurant to Franco's apartment. She had no idea that he had taken a small blue pill at the restaurant in order to rock her world. The woman was slightly disoriented when she woke up in the morning in a room that was not her bedroom. It took her a few seconds to realize that she was lying in bed with her lover Franco, who was sleeping pressed against her back. She giggled when she felt him press more tightly against her. At the beginning of the day they had leisurely, comfortable sex, and then moved their games into the shower. They did not leave the bedroom until they dressed to go out to dinner. During the day, Roz did not once remember her husband. That night the couple had sex 2 more times, once on Sunday morning, and then one last time after lunch. After their last lovemaking, Roz took a second shower in order to be as clean as possible and not smell of sex when she returned home to Nick. It was time for her to become Nick's faithful wife again. It was already well past afternoon when Roz returned home. When she pulled into her spot, Nick's car was not in the garage. She wondered whether he would be sober when he returned. A feeling of guilt seized Roz as she carried her bag into the house. She noted to herself that Nick, as usual, had cleaned up well after himself. He must have washed and put away all the dishes he had used, since there were none even on the dish rack. Only when she went to put her dirty clothes into the hamper did she notice that something was wrong. She had been gone for almost 2 days, but there were no signs that Nick had put any of his dirty clothes into the hamper. She headed into the bedroom, growing angrier and angrier, as she expected to find a pile of clothes on the floor. But found nothing. She checked his closet and then the drawers, discovering that they were almost empty. No. 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 No, Roz screamed. "Oh, Nick, what have you done?" Nick lived in Virginia for about half a year, but was not happy and went even farther south a second time, finally settling in a small town near Memphis, Tennessee. To make it harder for his wife to find him, he began calling himself Nick Washburn, using his mother's maiden name. He found work in a family-owned hardware store. Mara Bledsoe was looking for a new set of locks for the front door when she approached Nick, who was laying out grass seed in the farm supplies aisle. Nick heard the woman approach and, raising his eyes, saw a pretty young waif who looked hardly older than her teenage years. Later, Nick admitted to her that he was surprised that her father trusted his teenage daughter to go to the store alone instead of going himself. Mara left the store with a set of keys and a scheduled date for the following Saturday evening. As soon as she showed the skeptical Nick her driver's license, confirming that she was indeed of legal age. "Hey, I do not want your father coming after me with a shotgun or a baseball bat. Or, even worse, for me to be arrested for getting involved with a minor," Nick said. Mara did not even blink an eye when she heard the man's request. At a height of 150 centimeters, a weight of 45 kilograms, and possessing an attractive face and the flexible body of a gymnast, which would likely have quickly made her a star in rhythmic gymnastics, she appreciated that this handsome man was truly cautious. She also noticed a small indentation on the ring finger of his left hand, indicating that there had once been a wedding ring there, but that it had been gone for some time. Nick had not dated anyone since leaving his wife. Truthfully, he did not trust the fairer sex, but there was something in the innocence that this young woman radiated that touched him deeply. Perhaps she looked innocent, but at the same time Mara was straightforward. About midway through dinner, she asked Nick about his previous marriage, pointing to the fading indentation on his finger. He took a deep breath and told the woman about what he believed was the greatest failure of his life. "That is a terrible story, Nick. How could someone who says that she loves do something like that?" She asked. "I have asked myself that question 1,000 times over the past year," he said. "The only thing I can think of is that I agreed with her about everything she asked for, so she could not imagine that I would be able to refuse her. Even in something as insane as this." Nick was absolutely honest and explained to Mara that formally he was not divorced. They discussed all the pros and cons of his actions. And by the end of the evening Mara at least understood his feelings. She also believed that Roz would file for divorce, justifying it by saying that he had abandoned her. Although she was not sure that Nick would ever learn about it without speaking to her, a year later, Mara was already living with Nick. This arrangement did not please Mara's widowed mother because of Nick's questionable marital status. Nick understood her concern and volunteered to sign a legally binding contract in which Mara would be named his lawful heir and their property would be divided equally if they separated. Mara was crazy about Nick and was thrilled when he gave her an engagement ring a few months after she moved in with him. When 6 months later she gave him a son weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces, he bought her a wedding ring. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, which by that time was already living in a 3-bedroom house in town. Mara officially changed her name to Nick Washburn's surname. No one questioned the legitimacy of the family's existence. For Nick and Mara it was a bond. Their bond. Nick knew from first-hand experience that marriage vows, legal marriage vows, could be broken just as easily as tearing a sheet of paper. 3 years later, Nick and Mara Washburn became the new owners of the hardware store. Nick's boss and his wife had no children of their own, so when it came time for them to retire, they offered the store to the Washburns. Nick and Mara became entrepreneurs and became even more deeply involved in the social life of the community. By a strange coincidence, Mara loved orchestral music, and they were both season ticket holders at the Memphis Symphony Orchestra venue. When an advertisement appeared for an upcoming concert featuring a rising star of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, Mara's first reaction was fear, but the more she thought about it, the more she understood that this was something that both she and her husband needed to do. Nick hesitated when Mara said that she wanted to attend the concert, but he knew that he could not refuse his wife. Partner. Anything. Yes, I know what I am asking, Nick, but if I am not opposed to not hiding, then you should be the same. Besides, you probably should have had this meeting many years ago, Mara stated. Although Roz was surprised that Nick had taken most of his things with him when he left the house, she was more angry than worried, because once again she knew that he would return to her when his anger subsided. Nevertheless, she made a couple of cautious phone calls to several friends, hoping that Nick would stay with them until his madness passed. She also sent him text messages several times, telling him that she was home and waiting for him. but decided not to call him directly or leave a message. When nothing was heard from him by mid-morning on Monday, Roz called the hardware store and asked to speak with him. She was connected to Jennifer, an employee in the payroll department at the store. Roz. Nick called first thing this morning and quit. He said for us to send his final check to his mother. Our old man got really angry. I assumed that since you are calling, you did not know either, and he left you, Jennifer said. The silence on the other end of the line told Jennifer a great deal. I am sorry, girl. I do not know what is going on, but I really am sorry, she said quietly. Roz thanked the woman and hung up. She was more stunned than angry. She knew that she would have to call her mother-in-law to find out where her husband was. At the thought of making the call, everything inside her tightened. Mom, I think you know why I am calling, Roz said when the elderly woman picked up the phone. I need to find Nick. He is not answering me, and I do not think he will. He took his things and left. I think it is already too late for you to apologize, Roz. He told me what you did. And I have to say that I am ashamed of you. I never thought you were capable of something like that, Ethel Summers said. My first reaction was to box your ears, but I calmed myself. But Nick is a completely different matter. Please, Mom, I need to talk to him, preferably face to face. He knows that it did not mean anything. We just need to talk everything through. Roz said, Oh, dear, you have a more serious problem than you think. You do not think that you need to apologize for what you did, do you? Ethel asked. We talked about it, Mom. Nick and I talked about it, Roz said. It was one weekend out of all the ones we would have spent together. Before and after. He agreed. No, dear. We talked to him. And I know that he did not agree to this. You wanted it, so everything is distorted in your mind, and you think that he agreed to it. He would never have agreed to this, Ethel said. He gave you the house and most of the money. He asked me to tell you to file for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. And he is not coming back. In the years that followed, when Roz became somewhat more successful financially, she hired a detective agency several times to search for her husband. The agencies never came close enough to change anything, although Nick was not actually hiding, aside from changing his name, so. This? Roz asked, pointing first at Nick and then at Mara. How am I supposed to understand this? You do remember that we are still married. Why can you ignore your vows, and I cannot? A faint smile appeared on Nick's face. He took Mara's hand as the three of them sat at the table, eating cheesecake and drinking coffee with Mexican liqueur. I believe that our vows were dissolved the moment you walked out the door to fuck. Franco. That was his name, I believe. Nick said quietly, without much emotion. Now it was Roz's turn to smile. She knew that her husband remembered Franco's name. She knew that he would never forget it, and this, as you put it, is exactly what you think, Nick said. Mara and I did not give vows. But, as you showed me, vows do not mean a damn thing if both parties do not respect them. But Mara respects me, and I respect her, so we do not feel that we need them. We have been together for more than 8 years. We have 2 wonderful children. Here, let me show you our children. Nick took out his phone, made a few movements with his fingers, and a photograph of his children appeared on the screen. He handed the phone to Roz, whose eyes widened and filled with tears as she looked at the children who should have been hers. We were going to create our own family if you had not run away, Roz said irritably. When you decided to spend the weekend with Franco, you should already have realized that you and I would never have children, Nick said. Those were weekends outside of time. No love. I simply had a chance. You are still sticking to that hackneyed formula. Nick interrupted. 10 years have passed. And you could not come up with better arguments than that? Or at least apologize. So tell me, what do your parents think of your arguments? Maybe you lied to them. Roz flushed deeply. Mara glared angrily at the interlocutor. Since the three of them entered the restaurant, she had not spoken a word, except to place her order. Finally, Mara could not hold back. "It does not matter. You let him go. I found him. I am not stupid enough to let him go. Besides, I know that he will never abandon the children and me the way you abandoned him." Roz looked defeated. All right. I understand," she said after a few seconds of silence. "So I may assume that you want a divorce and want me to file for it myself?" Nick nodded. "So why did you never file for divorce before this?" "Surely a woman with your looks and career had plenty of admirers," Nick said. "And what about Franco? I thought that as soon as I left, he would be comforting you within minutes." "Franco was not going to divorce his wife either," Roz replied. "It really was just sex, as I told you. As for others, there were a few, but none of them could compare to you, and my relationships were short. Besides, I always hoped that you would come back. I know you loved me. You destroyed us. You broke us. I truly loved you, Roz, but you should have known that I would never accept it. I told you that, remember?" Nick said, "Yes, you told me, but I simply knew that our love was strong enough to overcome this," Roz said. "Those weekends were not supposed to be anything more than just a blip on our radar. I live in the real world, Roz. Not in that invented world in which you artists and performers live," Nick said. "For you, sex with Geraldi meant nothing. For me, it meant everything. You underestimated yourself." Roz winced. Everything had gone wrong from what she had expected. She was the beautiful and sophisticated Rosalind Summers, an outstanding violinist. The woman next to Nick was a little girl, a cute local girl who had somehow dragged her husband into bed and borne him 2 offspring. She sincerely believed that she would be the clear winner in any battle between her and Mara, especially when the two of them were sitting at the same table in front of Nick. "You must be joking, Nick," Roz said. "Of course she is sweet and all that. But she is not me. And I know that you still love me. We can fix everything, Nick, if you come back to me." Nick was just about to respond when he looked at Mara, whose teeth were clenched tightly and whose face was crimson. Nick had never seen such an expression on Mara before. "I think you do not know me at all," Mara snarled at the other woman. "You see in me only a country bumpkin who is not fit to shine your splendor. But do not be mistaken about this. This soccer parent committee mom will not tolerate another woman seeking the favor of her man. You will go back to your city and finally file for divorce, or, when you least expect it, I will appear somewhere nearby and break all 10 of your fingers so well that you will never be able to play the violin again. Of course, that would be a terrible blow for all your admirers, such as me, but a woman must do what she must. Do you understand?" "Which?" Mara's eyes narrowed into thin slits as she finished speaking almost in a whisper. Rosalind felt the threat to the depths of her soul. "I understand," she whispered plaintively, lowering her eyes to the table. "Good," Mara replied. "I think Roz needs to return to her hotel, Nick." Nick watched the scene unfolding before him in stunned silence. This was a side of Mara he had never seen before. And, to be honest, he was both a little frightened and more than aroused. Nick quickly signaled the waiter to pay the bill, after returning home to Boston. Rosalind did what she had been told. Then she decided to find herself a man for whom she could feel the same feelings that Mara felt for Nick. Mara had not only frightened Rosalind with her threat, but had also shown her how Mara was prepared to fight for her man. Then Rosalind realized that her love for Nick had never been as strong as Mara's. Rosalind saw that Mara's love for Nick was as strong as Rosalind's love for her music. And that music was a poor substitute for Nick when she was alone at home in her fashionable Boston apartment. Unfortunately for Rosalind, she never found another man who could evoke similar feelings. From time to time she dated men, but she never married. Although Nick and Mara agreed that they did not need a wedding, in order to show their love for each other he organized a small ceremony in the couple's home a month after he received notice of the final dissolution of the marriage. Mara sobbed from the very beginning of the event until the moment when the officiant told Nick that he could kiss the bride. Mara immediately threw herself into Nick's arms, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed him firmly on the lips, finally letting him go when the embarrassed officiant quietly cleared his throat. "Mine. Now officially," she announced. "Officially, unofficially, but forever," he replied in return. From the outside, this story looks simple. Not as a drama and not as a tragedy, but as a chain of choices, each made voluntarily. No one here turned out to be an accidental victim. One chose to leave, another chose to replace trust with excuses, a third chose to hold on to what truly mattered. Time put everything in its place. And sometimes, it is the only judge.